very big open topic. And the way to think about it is kind of like thinking about star essay topics. I know, don't throw up in your mouth on me or anything. But when you think about writing that star essay, they essentially have to come up with a prompt that is large enough and wide enough to catch everybody who's taking the test at that time. Both you guys that are up here at the top of the, mental chain and everybody else. So think about it kind of like if you've ever seen those big fishing nets they use in the ocean. And people always like to gripe at them because if you've ever seen the video of how they do that kind of fishing, they might be like, we're fishing for tuna. And so they throw those big nets out there and they pull them up and out dumps everything. Tuna, sharks, whatever else they catch. And so think about it in a similar way. They've got to have a net that can catch everything. It's going to be a wide open question. They're going to hope that you can bring your experience to it. And we're going to talk about kind of what I saw, as well as contrasting what I saw to what they saw nationally, and kind of look in that way towards how can we improve our product. So here, they give you this bit about the term overrated is often used to diminish concepts, places, roles, etc., that the speaker believes do not deserve the prestige they commonly enjoy. For example, many writers have argued that success is overrated. A character in a novel by Anthony Burgess famously describes Rome as a vastly overrated city, and Queen Rania of Jordan herself has asserted that being queen is overrated. Select a concept, place, role, etc., to which you believe that the term overrated should be applied, then write a well-developed essay in which you explain your judgment. Use appropriate evidence from your reading experience or observations to support your argument. So here, let's take this word and you tell me from your perspective what we get. Now, what they're wanting students to do here is to create an argument. So we have to have a position. We need evidence. We need support. And most importantly, we need logic. And so when we look at, hey, what did they have to say from the national grading? We can look at that chief reader report. So we pulled up yesterday the chief reader report to kind of help us with question 2. Same thing here. At the end of the national grading for the AP exam, the person that's in charge of the whole thing creates this report to show, hey, what did we want students to do? What did students end up doing? And how can we improve the product of student results going forward? And so they pointed out that with doing this, within this particular paragraph, they're pointing out that students had trouble because they didn't choose a topic. Instead, they ended up focusing on multiple topics. That was in a small minority here in this school on this mock. I saw very few people that, tried to do more than one topic and kind of failed in that way. But I think their point here at the end of the paragraph is more specific to what we were seeing. They say overall stronger responses took care to explain how they were using evidence to support their argument and avoided giving a series of examples without thinking about how those examples connected to each other and to the larger argument of the essay. I think that some of our issues with this came up because of 1, evidence, but 2, the logical reasoning we use to try to build our argument. A lot of people had topics, not the issue. But what you ended up doing as you started to talk is generalized about the topic, and you may have picked evidence, but you really didn't think about expressing how it connects. Here it probably made perfect sense. We didn't get it on paper well. And so if you have a grader who's reading that essay and they're seeing the connection, but you're not expressing it, they are unlikely to give you the credit. The grader is going to be a little too concerned about making a connection that you didn't. They want to see it explicitly. And so I think that's going to be something we're going to pay attention to. We also want to look at some of the other things they pointed out here. They did point out that more skilled essays also tended not to follow a formula. And when we look at your essay, you will probably see that what you related back to is the basic hamburger construction. Think back to middle school and that nice handout that you had for an outline that was a picture of a hamburger or a sandwich. And so it was like the introduction and the conclusion were the buns. And then here are the things in the middle. These are the main ideas. And some of you are like, oh, I love that. I remember that. Some of us fell back to doing that. Now, is that wrong? No. But what they're saying is, in essence, for a composition test, they want to see your skills as a writer. Formulas work great when we're starting out, but eventually we learn how to move beyond the formula. Think for a moment of the times that you've read a book, whether it's a novel or something, and you notice a sentence or a phrase that is grammatically incorrect in that book. And you get really frustrated because you're like, well, if they can do that, why can't I do that? And the teacher probably came back to you to say, well, they know what they're doing and they made that choice intentionally. You don't know what you're doing and you unintentionally make those mistakes. Once we learn the formula, we're able to break the formula because we understand how it works, and stylistically we can do different things. They're pointing that out. Better essays, we're able to take advantage of kind of moving beyond. Here is my thesis. My thesis has 3 supports, A, B, and C. Paragraph 2 will focus on A. Paragraph 3 will focus on B. That basic construction. So they point out, hey, what did we notice students did that were knowledge gaps, issues with this? So 1, students relied on formula. Then they also point us to, hey, you can look at this particular sample, which you can find today, and look to see how they break it. Issue 2, what we kind of said. Students repeated their claim via paraphrases of the claim instead of supporting the claim. In other words, you continue to assert your point rather than actually developing it and creating that argument. We'll look at a sample that kind of goes beyond that. 3, students did not pay attention to their own use of language. In other words, there's no variety. You didn't attempt to punch it up. You're just kind of writing. And then lastly, students did not argue. There's more. Students did not argue convincingly why a concept, place, role, or something else was overrated. Instead, they sometimes talked about when it was appropriate or not to use the term, reducing the prompt to a question of usage rather than developing a substantial argument over a topic. They had, unlike upper half essays that qualified generalizations and offered claims that could be supported, less skilled essays made sweeping claims, did not offer enough evidence, or put too much weight on limited examples. We saw lots of that. Essays used personal or literary examples without explaining them fully to explain why the examples were overrated. We saw lots of this. You're going to just throw something out there and assume because you told me, hey, luxury items are overrated, and you're like, Versace, that I'm going to know what that is. And I'm going to know why that's overrated according to you. So they look at, hey, what are some things that can be done for improvement? And I think really what we want to look at is, where are we looking? Right here and here. So once you have a clear understanding of what the prompt is asking, we didn't have an issue with that. They did see lots of essays that students just didn't understand what to do. Teachers might consider helping them to understand that when they choose a variety of kinds or types of evidence as support, they should focus on finding ways to articulate how the different pieces fit together. So if you know how you're going to support this, having that clear idea in mind before you start writing, how am I going to link these pieces? And especially looking at that idea of a variety. And then here, students must attempt to give detailed examples, explaining how the evidence they choose illustrates why their claim is valid. They pointed out what many lower level essays do is list examples and then assert that the example supports the claim. We don't really examine, we just continue to say, see. We're going to switch to looking at samples more today because I want to give a chance to really see what did they see as they started to look. So we have 2 different sample sets. We're going to put our attention towards the handwritten ones. So on today's Canvas page, These are the 2019 released samples. It's going to take you to a Google Sheet, and it's that big document that's like 90 some pages. We're going to go all the way down to page 73. That's where the essays start for this. So on your screen, you probably want to go to page 73 in this PDF. It is sample, I think M is the first one. Yeah. I'm going to give you a few moments to scan the 9 documents that they have here as student samples. And what I want you to pay attention to is 1, what is the topic of each essay? So they had to pick a focus. What is overrated? So for each of those 9, we're just going to survey first. What's the topic they picked? So read through them, and then we're going to make a list. So you don't have to read the entire essay. Just look at each sample and figure out, okay, this is what this one's about. Got it. Move to the next one. All right, everybody good? Let's survey these to look at the topics for each of these essays as best as we can express them. Let's start with M. M says that what is overrated? How about the next one, which is the 8 score? Yeah, this is where they talk about Jefferson. This is one that was referenced in the grader document. The next one. What? Say it louder.
Grades.
Grades. After that.
Romance.
Romance. Next.
Cell phone use.
Cell phone use. After cell phones.
Money.
Followed by.
The term overrated. Oh wait, no, number 3 was Florida.
Oh, that's right. Then it was the overrated
Yes.
one.
And then America.
Okay. So if we take a look at these, we have to consider that this student, right, they have 8 weeks on you, or not even that, they have 6 weeks on you roughly. So you can't be like, oh, they understand something more about this course or something more about this. Not really. This student, 40 minutes, never having seen the prompt before, was able to put together an essay on these topics. Notice that the top, notice some of the different things that we have here. How many of these likely involve a personal anecdote? A story or something that relates just to themselves. Which ones would you say?
Grades, romance, cell phone use in Florida.
I'd say at least most of them. The term overrated is extremely opinionated.
Yes, but what we asked for was a personal anecdote, not an opinion.
So did the top one number 9.
No, but
I read.
The Ivy League one? Okay. We're going to look a little bit, but where I want to look more, yes, we have opinions, and yes, we have things like that. But if you're looking, are they talking about actual topics here? Or are they talking about something like growing up is overrated? Being an adult is overrated. Are they doing that? This is where we got to take a second and go, okay, what do we produce? We can't argue away and be like, oh yeah, well they did this at the end of the course. There's 6 weeks in front of you. Like it's not like they learned. It's not like there's some. And I promise, there's not something coming up in 2 weeks where I'm going to open up the box of secret knowledge I've been hiding from you. Now, we've taught stuff. You got it. When we look at the other samples too, you're going to notice the better scored essays. They're not talking about something that it's like their own personal thing. Yes, it's opinion based, but we're going to look. The evidence that they're using is stuff they know, and it's something we said from the beginning of the course. At the end of the day, this test has a bias to it in favor of kids that know stuff. And if you know stuff, we have things that we can pull from, rather than just trying to pull from the limited resource of what's around you in your own personal life. Here's the thing. When we write, we know that the first 3 things we consider in the rhetorical process are exigence, audience, and purpose. So I just want you to think for a second. Who are you writing this essay to? The graders. How old are most of the people that are showing up to grade? You don't have to guess a specific age, but think. Probably middle age. Think about it. I'm 38. The last thing I want to do at the minutes of my life is go sit in some big conference room and grade essays for a whole week. That sounds like torture. I'd rather you pull every single one of my fingernails off. Yeah. Instead, we are talking about people that willfully choose to do this for a week of their life. They sit in this room, they grade like 1,000 essays in the course of this week. Ugh. Do you think you have anything to teach them or a perspective to present about why growing up is overrated? Here's the thing, they're just going to kind of roll their eyes and be like, oh. Now, am I saying that there is not a good essay to be written there? There is. But for the most part, if all we're doing is talking about your life, your experience, your anecdotes about it, we don't have anywhere to go with this. And when we look at that idea of the grader saying, hey, evidence was the issue, we saw lots of assertions, we saw lots of limited use, they just are in that pool of, we've got to look at talking about something, having that topic, and thinking about how these different pieces of evidence that go beyond just you relate together. And what I saw was a lot of essays that wanted to focus just here on the anecdotes instead of looking beyond. An anecdote is good and it can be useful. Look at these. We have ones that use it. And here's why I drew these lines. On this old 9-point rubric, if you're getting a 6 and up, you're scoring an essay that's going to gain you the college credit. If you're here, this is kind of the nebulous point. This is like, you might. If you're here, no. And you probably, if you looked at these and read them, you probably were like, oh yeah, that's kind of funny. Before we laugh at any of these essays, we always want to remind ourselves that this is a student just like you. They did their best work that they could. We're not saying that it's good work. It's the best they could in that moment. So we don't ever want to like disparage it and be like, ha, 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 even though it's really easy sometimes. Instead, let's put our attention here. I want you to pick one of these two, whether you look at M or I think it's D, the Thomas Jefferson one. I want you to take a couple of minutes to just read the essay as a whole. And I want you to pay attention to how they use their evidence and how they link their ideas together. Remember, they specifically pointed at that Jefferson essay as a good example of one that has that balance of being able to do things. So take a couple of minutes, look at one of these two, and then we're going to talk about kind of what do you see? What are your trends that you're noticing? Anybody need more time? We're just looking at one of these essays. Anybody need more time? Okay, tell me some of the things that stand out to you looking at whichever essay you chose.
For the first essay about celebrity and fame, what stood out to me was kind of like all their different ideas and how like I just like how they didn't follow style like that, like you were saying like ABC.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked that style and I felt like it works good and like presenting their argument. Like I've never thought about doing it like that. I thought I had to do this.
Yeah, I think you so often get we become sort of trapped. We've always done this. We've been told, hey, you have 3 things. That when you suddenly see a successful essay that's like, I have 2 main reasons. You all of a sudden go like, oh, you can do that? I didn't know you could do that. Absolutely. I think that and they used to say this, they've changed the style of what their chief grader reports look like, but they would say for a lot of years, they would prefer getting an essay with 2 strong examples than an essay that all of a sudden has a 3rd example that's weak and ruins the paper. And so here you get that balance with both. And notice there are 2 different styles of doing it. If you had to guess, how many read the first one about fame and celebrity? Like, oh wow, majority. Think about where those examples come from and what she's able to quote. Lyrics from a song. How does she know so much about Anthony Bourdain, likely? What? She probably has an interest, but did you notice how a lot of this evidence, once it gets down to it, is what she saw on the show? So she's pulling from, hey, I watched this show and I know this guy's story. And then, of course, her own bit, but notice that even though it might start with an anecdote, is it all about her story? She starts to get into all of this stuff with like Varsity Blues, like the Lori Loughlin thing, all the celebrities that paid for their kids to go to college and get into good schools. So she's able to relate. Here's my experience. Here's what these others were doing. Ugh. And so notice she's going somewhere with it. There's a direction. We see a development here too. Did you notice as you read this one, her use of rhetorical strategies to improve the quality of her writing? Little things. Hey, let's throw in an appropriate rhetorical question. Hey, let's look at how we frame this. This is a student that has a clear purpose in mind. When we go back over here to thinking about who's my audience, but more so, what's my purpose? My purpose is to drive this idea of why this concept is overrated and to fully explore it, not just to kind of be like, see, I told you, it's overrated. Did anybody read the Jefferson one? Oh, and I was going to bring that up because how many of you, as you look through this document, you're like, man, this handwriting is awful. Yeah, welcome to my world. This is not bad. Most of the stuff they have in here is not bad at all. And some of you got to keep this in mind. And this is a talking point that we got to have about, we're taking this test on paper. If a grader can't read your handwriting, they can't reward you for what you're doing well. And so always keep in mind these moments where you're like, oh, the handwriting is terrible. Take your time and slow down. It's okay. When we get rushed, when we get nervous, our handwriting becomes even more illegible and sloppy. So as we're working, we got to keep that in mind because not only are we having to write by hand, we're also going to have to do it in pen. And for a lot of students, that's that extra struggle. But we'll practice. Don't worry. Let's talk about the Jefferson one really quick. If you read that, what'd you notice? Yeah, he's referencing lots of primary sources. This kid knows his stuff about Jefferson. But hey, what class are you in that would probably help you with this? U.S. history. So if we think about this, would it be logical for us to assume that likely this is a kid who had to do a project on a president or a founding father for U.S. history? Maybe we could even say that they live in the Virginia area, or at some point they went on vacation there and they went to Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello, and went through the whole thing. we can assume they're using that information that they know. So when we talk about that basic bias, that this bias on the test is in favor of kids that know stuff, these two essays prove it. And they prove it in two different ways. One is definitely the academic way, but look at that first one. How many of you can sing me a lyric from an Ariana Grande song, or whatever her name is? Isn't she the one that licked the donut? Is she that one? Gross. Gross. Huh? Well, so if we look at that one, like, how many of you can tell me a song lyric? Maybe not by Ariana Grande, but think about, look how effective it is here because it ties into the topic she wants to make. We've got to keep a basic idea of what is it that we know that can be effective for this. It doesn't always have to be this textbook kind of stuff, but it's got to be outside of me. Those me essays, they're going to top out. If you take a look, they're probably going to top out over here at around a 6. Unless you have a really good style. So on our more current rubric, we're looking at something that's going to get you a 4. So it might get you that basic credit, but keep in mind when we looked, if you're getting 4s on your essays, you got about half the multiple choice, you'll get that 3 score. But what if you're going to a school that will give you 2 college credits if you can get a 4 on this test? We want to keep in mind, 3 is going to get us something, but you might be looking at a school that, you know what, if we can bump that score to a 4, we're getting you some additional credit. Quickly, I just want to show you, we do have these other samples. These are the ones that are based on our 6-point rubric. I just want to show you the topics that these cover as well, because you might be like, okay, so you look at one sample set. I get your point. Here's the best one. Capitalism is overrated. The next one, still getting all 6 points. The Electoral College is overrated. Now, if you're looking here, how many of you can even tell me what the Electoral College is? Yeah. But think about, this kid doesn't just even know it. He can talk about why it's overrated. So when we look at that idea of that bias being there, it's right here. We've got to be aware, because if you're going like, well, crap, I don't even know. I don't know that. Like, I'm done. It's not that you're sunk as much as we need to start taking that inventory of what do you know? Because as we look at some of the other topics here, right? Here, competition is overrated. Next, people try to be different. The idea of being different and unique is overrated. Wow. This one looks at, in unusual circumstances, the term overrated should be applied to the idea or freedom in regard to social change, but overall it should not be applied in regard to global devastation and cruel treatment. This is one of those, I think I can handle 2 topics, and they probably didn't do very successfully with it. And then, here's the whole essay. That should tell you how well this student probably scored. But, here, what are they looking at? Wealth is overrated. So when we start to think here about approaching this, we've got to pay attention to our evidence and our development. How do we work these things together? What do we see? The argument is the broadest one. You absolutely can bring what you know to it. But what we want to avoid is something that is just too personal here and all based on anecdotes, or having evidence that's too generalized. For example, I saw lots of examples in our pool that talked about luxury items or wealth of some sort. But then as the essay went on, they never actually pointed to anything luxurious. They never pointed to anything in particular. They just kept abstractly talking about concepts and ideas without actually backing it up. So if we're looking at making that difference, we really want to have that solid plan of how are we going to support. So tomorrow is our rewrite day.